I have pivoted. When I was building my first modular rack, I didn't have any clear end goal in mind. I started with a few modules that I thought looked interesting, and then I got booked for my first live modular show. I quickly filled out the rest of my rack with modules I thought I would need to do what I was trying to do live. Inevitably, things didn't quite work out the way I thought they would. I ended up with a system that was too big, complex, and difficult to perform with. I pared that down, simplified, and put it all in a smaller case that's now been mostly unchanged for over a year. My first rack, which I call my studio rack, ended up with all the leftover modules that didn't make it into the live show. This was supposed to be my free space for improvisation and experimentation. I tried buying a few more modules to complement what I had, but no matter what I did, it always just felt like a random collection of modules and not a cohesive instrument. This is the problem with modular. You're essentially playing two roles, not just as a synth player, but a synth designer as well. As I practiced my skills as a performer, I would often find myself slipping back into that role of a designer, second-guessing my choice of modules and wondering what would happen if I rearranged things just one more time. I was so frustrated by this issue that I almost considered ditching modular altogether and purchasing a semi-modular instead. But then I took another look at Tiptop Audio's line of Buchla modules. It had come a long way in the past couple years, and I realized that designing a full, well-balanced system using only this line of modules within a single Mantis case was not only possible, but even relatively affordable. I love the idea of single manufacturer systems. There's something about all the modules being united in aesthetics and design philosophy that I find beautiful. If the case is made by the manufacturer as well, that's even better. This seemed like a good compromise between the endless possibilities of a fully modular system and the cohesiveness of a semi-modular system. The Buchla 200T series checked off many of my boxes. It sounds beautiful, of course. It's hard to generalize, but overall I'd say it's a little softer and less aggressive than other modular systems, with a sort of imprecise, analog character. The system is also absolutely beautiful to look at. All these equations and graphs, paired with the colorful jacks and knobs, make it look like a weird combination of vintage laboratory equipment and Fisher-Price toy. While overall the look of the system is uniform, the layout of the knobs and jacks aren't uniform at all. Each module has its own unique arrangement. Apparently, Buchla intended this as an accessibility feature, so that individuals who can't see could operate the system more easily by feel. Another advantage of the system is that all of the modules are either analog or at least what I would call analog style, meaning knob per function, no menu diving, no menus at all, and no mode switching or button combinations to memorize. And of course, the biggest reason to choose this system is the history and mythos that comes with the Buchla name. For those that don't know, Don Buchla is one of the two men who basically invented the modular synthesizer as we know it, the other being Bob Moog. Both designed modular synthesizers for universities and studios starting in the 1960s. Don Buchla had the Buchla 100 series of modules, Bob Moog had the Moog synthesizer. Each were developing their systems from the ground up, roughly at the same time. Each may have been aware of what the other was doing, but they were working independently, pursuing their own separate visions of how modular synths should be designed. Development of the Moog synthesizer basically ended at the start of the 70s. After this came the Mini Moog, a smaller, more practical instrument that would go on to be another legend all its own. Buchla, however, remained in his own world, continuing to develop and expand his ideas for modular synthesizers all throughout the 70s with the Buchla 200 series of modules. This is the series that Tip Top Audio is now recreating in Eurorack. It's impossible to overstate how influential both the Moog synthesizer and the Buchla 200 series were on modern synth design. I know that for me, before I got into Eurorack, I used Arturia's Moog Modular V plugin almost exclusively to make music for over a decade. Even after using lots of different Eurorack modules that draw from all kinds of influences, the Moog way of working still very much feels like the default, and Buchla like the interesting alternative. It's still striking just how different these two worlds are. For every famous Moog module, there is an equivalent but distinct idea that comes from Buchla. Moog has the 4-pole ladder filter, Buchla has the Vactral-based low-pass gate. Moog has the 4-stage envelope generator, Buchla has the function generator. Moog has the standard oscillator with 4 basic waveform outputs, Buchla has the complex waveform generator. The divide is so stark that later generations began to think of these as entirely separate schools of synthesis, one called East Coast synthesis, the other called West Coast synthesis. I know many people now question the usefulness of these terms. Personally, I wonder if maybe we shouldn't just call it Moog style and Buchla style. One of the things that's so great about going back to the original instruments is that it allows you to re-examine some of the mythology that's built up along with the history. For example, Buchla's instruments have a reputation for being more experimental. I think the biggest reason for this is that Moog's instruments became much more successful in commercial, popular music, while Buchla's instruments remained very niche, mostly used in art music and academic settings. But honestly, the Moog synthesizer is also pretty experimental, and both systems can be used for more traditional musical sounds too. For me, using the Buchla 200 series is more like using a modular synthesizer from an alternate timeline, designed without the influence of Moog, made to basically do all the same things, just taking a different path to get there. Now, I've talked about the benefits of this system, but there are plenty of drawbacks as well. These modules are not what you'd call feature-rich, especially given how big they are. This really can't be overstated. If you were shopping for modules based purely on function per HP, you would never pick the Buchla version, not once. You would always find a modern version that offers more. Choosing the Buchla 200 series is a bit like moving into a tiny house. It's a purposeful move away from the excesses of the modern world and towards a lifestyle that embraces simplicity and minimalism. Of course, how much you feel the constraints of the system really depends on how strict you are about combining it with other gear. I'm taking a more purist approach to start, just to help me really learn the instrument. The only other gear I'm using is this Behringer spring reverb unit, which seemed appropriate to the time period that Buchla comes from. I will be honest, taking this purist approach has so far been an exercise in letting go. I am constantly having ideas for patches that, at this point, I just don't know how to execute on this system. So instead, I'm trying to learn to just let go. Let myself draw inspiration from the instrument in front of me rather than try to force it to conform to my pre-existing expectations. And I think all that provokes the question, why did I bother doing this? What is the point of going back to vintage designs that are more limited? I would argue it's for the same reason that guitarists still go back to some of the earliest amplifier designs, and why we still use the sound of the 808. Music technology just doesn't progress like other forms of technology. Every few years, you replace your cell phone or your laptop. Meanwhile, the design of the violin has remained virtually untouched for hundreds of years. Making music isn't like making a spreadsheet or a phone call. Because music itself is subjective, the design of musical instruments is also very subjective. Just like we still enjoy art that's made hundreds of years ago, older ways of making art are not so easily discarded. If I want to emulate my heroes from a bygone era, it's natural for me to want to use the tools that they used. Besides that, I think it's often acknowledged in the modular space that the constant race for better, newer versions of the same gear can leave you feeling a little burnt out. Just how many versions of a low-pass filter do you need? Just how many different function generators do you need? Now don't get me wrong, I wouldn't want people designing modular gear to stop experimenting or coming up with new ideas. But if my goal is to focus on my own skills as a performer, then at some point I'm going to have to decide that the instrument in front of me is simply good enough. Buchla carefully refined his ideas over multiple decades, and the 200 series represents a functional and flexible modular system. The fact that I'm coming to it from a more modern perspective is a problem with me, and not the instrument. If I fail to make beautiful music with it, then that failure is with me, and not the instrument. But that's all from my initial impressions today. I plan on making a series of videos documenting my journey with this instrument, really diving into it module by module. If that sounds interesting to you, please remember to hit the subscribe button and leave a like and a comment so that others can find my video as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely evening.